Well, thank you, Wild Basin, and thank you everyone for being here today. And I am just thrilled to talk about birds, so here we go. This is migration here in Central Texas. And before we start, I just want to kind of give you, these are some of the focal species that I worked with before. This red bird here, this is a Evie, it's a Hawaiian bird. I was able to work with them studying disease prevalence in Hawaii. And then that cute little chick over there, that is a piping plover chick. Got to work with those in New York. Does anybody know what that warbler is over there on the far left? Anybody at all by chance? Okay, that's our superstar gold-cheeked warbler. And then we have black-capped vireo. They don't get as much love, but they still get some love here. And then this is when I was working in Guam, and you don't see any birds in the picture because I didn't see any birds when I was out there. I was part of a follow-up research team that was trying to document the newly released Mariana crow that was released out there. And there wasn't any left because there was an invasive brown tree snake that just decimated everything out there. So this was very much like a Indiana Jones kind of scenario. Like their forests are very eerie. Not all of them, but in certain places. Like you'll walk out and in the mornings there is no dawn chorus. And there is just spider webs everywhere.
Wait,
because
where is this again?
This is Guam, the island of Guam.
Crossing Guam.
Yeah, I hear it has great scuba diving. But there's no avian predators to eat the spiders. So there is spider webs everywhere in the forests. And we're going to come back to that photo. All right, so to talk about migration with birds, it's really important to think about seasonality. It's a huge driver in a lot of the biological and the ecological processes that happen. And all right, so what I'm talking about here today, I really want you to come back to this image in your head. You probably haven't seen this since like 8th grade or something, I don't know. But you know, the Earth is tilted on its axis. And you can see that, you know, when it's rotating around the sun, there's certain portions of the Earth that's going to get more sunlight than others. Right now, just showing, like this is tilted toward the sun, so the northern hemisphere is receiving more sunlight, right? There's a lot more sunlight, there's a lot more photosynthesis happening, there's a lot more bugs happening at that same time. Your length of day is longer. Basically, a lot of these systems in our Earth, it's all about the sun, and it's about how much sunlight is being received. So keep that in mind. So how did migration evolve? Here's an ancestral oriole. This is one of the theories, and it's basically saying that migration evolved through like this gradual extension of movement of the birds. So as, you know, about 15,000 years ago, when these vast ice sheets started to melt, the birds, they were able to exploit the environments that were a little bit further north. Because then the vegetation started growing where the ice sheets had been taken up. And little by little, and as the Earth warmed a bit, they were able to extend and really optimize that sunlight that we were just talking about. So that is basically one of the theories about how migration had evolved. So now the way that migration occurs here in the Americas is generally we have 4 flyways, they're called. They're these really concentrated routes that the birds are taking as they're migrating north and south. There's the Pacific, there's the Central Flyway, here we are in Texas, we are right in the middle of that. There's the Mississippi, and then also the Atlantic. And as they're coming up, you know, northward in the springtime, they're following something called a green wave. As, you know, the snow and the ice begins to melt, and there's like this greening up and this leafing out, it's just producing a lot of like productivity and lots of insects, and the birds are really taking advantage of that. So they're moving up north, just taking advantage of this green wave. But they're not just migrating over land. Some of these birds are actually migrating over the Gulf of Mexico, which is pretty incredible. And not just a couple of big birds. You can see here, there's a graph that over 2 billion birds will cross the Gulf of Mexico during migration. And I'm assuming that you probably think that there are larger birds, right? Does anybody know has anyone ever seen a Baltimore Oriole before? So those are the ones that are flying over the Gulf of Mexico.
They were in my yard yesterday.
Really? Oh, that's great. I had a couple too. Yeah. Okay, and then there's also like a blue-headed warbler. We're gonna get smaller and smaller here. He's also crossed the Gulf of Mexico. There's your barn swallow. You know, these probably he probably weighs about 4 quarters. He probably weighs about 2 quarters. These are tiny little birds being able to do this. And then even hummingbirds, all right? I mean, that's pretty amazing. And not only are they migrating over the Gulf of Mexico, but they're doing it at night. So that's the way that they're migrating, and it's because there's favorable weather conditions, there's fewer predators, and they can avoid heat stress and they don't have to be dehydrated. So they take advantage of all these environmental situations at night. Now Texas, we are squarely in the center of the Central Flyway. You know, we have birds coming up through the land, we have birds crossing over the Gulf of Mexico. And this is a map, this is from Birdcast. It's actually a forecast for birds migrating in the spring and also in the fall. This was last year, April 18th, and I'm gonna show this really interesting video. So that red line is sunset, and then you can see all the birds. This is, and it tells you like the traffic rate. It's the abundance of birds that happen and how they come through the central Texas right there. And then there is sunrise, and they land. They basically stop.
So how does it get its data? How does it know that birds are migrating? Where does it get its data from?
That is radar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's actually using radar. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so how many birds are actually migrating at night? I pulled these stats off of Travis County, you know, like concentration of migratory birds. And this is just in one night. This was April 30th of last year. That's over 9 million birds traveling over Travis County. I don't mean all spring. That is per night. That's incredible. I mean, and the peak migration at one time was over 1 million birds of these tiny little birds. So just when you think you're putting your head down on that pillow and you think everything's quiet outside, there is a huge phenomenon happening above our heads. So when do these birds migrate? And it really just depends. We know that they migrate in the spring and in the fall, but each species has its own migration strategy. There's the Nashville warbler up here. He's a tiny little bird. He migrates through our area. He's an early migrant, so you'll be able to see him earlier in the springtime. And then you see another bird here, like the olive-sided flycatcher, and they fly later in the season. So it really all just depends on the species. And not only that, it depends on the age and the sex. So, you know, these birds are coming. It is a race to try and get the most prime habitat you can in the springtime. You want the best habitat because you want to attract the best mate, and you want to be able to rear your young hatchlings. So a lot of the males are coming up first, the older males, the more dominant males. Then comes the older females, so they'll come up next. And then they come with the younger males, and then the last to come are the young females. They'll follow behind. So it's really interesting. I've worked in banding stations, and it was really interesting to actually see like an influx. Like we would get, 200 red-eyed vireos one day, and then it would sort of trickle off, and then 3 days later there would be just another black and white warblers. So it was really interesting just to see again like these cycles and just the influence of these circadian rhythms that the birds have.
Did you find that whole kind of older males, older females, younger males, younger females, did that track across different species?
It did. Yeah. there's always exceptions, of course. Yeah, but generally that's how it is. How do they do it though? Migration is extremely energetically taxing, and it is very dangerous. This bird is a black-throated blue warbler, and it's known as having huge mortality during migration, and up to 85% of mortality for this one species occurs when it's migrating. This is a Nashville warbler again. I'm always bringing this one up. But these are the factors. These are why it's really difficult for birds to actually survive their migration. You know, there's weather events that happens. There's predation that happens. There's parasites. Every time they land to refuel, they're picking up parasites as well. And then the availability of stopover habitat. So, you know, for example, here we have this little bird, and he's wintering here down south, and he's coming up, and all of his breeding season range is up north. But the entire yellow area, he has to stop, or they have to stop at all these places every day to refuel and to get enough fuel where they can actually continue on their journey. So if you could just imagine having absolutely no idea where you're going to land, where you're going to park, like, you know, you don't know what's open, you know, for us, you know, you don't know what you're going to find. You don't know if it's going to be junk food. You don't know if you're going to get like a great buffet. That's what these birds face. There's also behavioral adaptations that birds have. Again, with seasonality, with the length of the day lengthening, there's some hormone changes that happens. And then there's something called Zugenruhe. It's a German word for migratory restlessness. And this is a camera that was able to capture a bird in the dark when it was caged. This is a migratory bird. And the birds get very restless at nighttime. You know, like if you were to see, they know they got to get going. You know, it's just all hormonally driven, but they know they have to get going and go up north. It can be actually experimentally induced. Like if you sort of alter the amount of sunlight that the bird is getting, it could actually trigger Zugenruhe, or it could depress it in some species. And also, the amount of this Zugenruhe that the bird experiences is proportional to the distance that the birds have to travel. So how do they know where they're going? And how do they know how to get there? It's just a combination of a lot of different migrational tools. It could be genetic, you know, they could have this directional sense, which is hardwired. There's celestial cues, like they'll use the stars at night. They can focus in on Polaris and actually see the motion of the stars, and they're able to orientate themselves that way. They could use the position of the sun. They use, you know, like the polarization at sunset to help themselves orientate. And they also have a magnetic compass. And this part, I'm going to really try and do my best to explain this. But there is actually something called, has anybody ever heard of spooky action at a distance?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like quantum physics we're talking about. And recently, the new theory, because we're always developing, right? The theory now is thinking that they don't have a magnetic sense in their brain or in their beak, but they actually have it in their eye. There's these pigment molecules, they're called cryptochromes, and they are in the retina of the eye. So as a bird is flying through the magnetic field on Earth, and the blue light from a star enters its eye, it'll hit that molecule, that pigment molecule, and it strikes the electron into the adjacent molecule. And at that point, because they have an unequaled amount of molecules, they become entangled. I don't quite get it, but this is what the physicists say. And when they become entangled, these molecules become momentarily magnetic. So a pigment molecule is becoming magnetic, and the birds, in theory, are supposed to be able to actually see the magnetic fields as it's flying through. I just think that's fascinating. Actually, this theory has been proposed since the 70s from a physicist, not an ornithologist, which I find interesting. And then finally, within the last few years, ornithologists have really picked up on this and have really gone behind this theory. So, okay, let's talk about stopover sites. These are obviously really important places where the birds need to refuel. Like refueling is a very important part, right? So when they're at these stopover sites, there's also like adaptations, the physiology of the bird. There's something called hyperphagia where the birds, because again of that extended light period, they begin to eat as much as they possibly can. And they gorge on just high amounts of fats and carbohydrates. Fats are wonderful for birds. You can see here to this left. No birds were harmed in this. This is just typical banding situations here. So there's a bird right there. You can actually blow the feathers apart when you have a bird in hand. So it's not like this bird has been plucked. And right here, you can see the red underneath, the feathers right over there underneath the skin. That's the muscle. Because the skin is transparent, you could actually see it. To the right, that's the fat. That's the amount of fat that same bird has eaten and is just developed over the course of a day. It's pretty phenomenal. So they use these fats to fuel their migration, particularly triglycerides. They can also do other amazing things. They can accommodate their organ size depending on what they need. So, when they're having this hyperphagia stage, they can actually expand their digestive tract. They can make it larger just to increase the efficiency when they're eating. And when they're in flight, their digestion system actually shrinks. Like their liver, their kidneys, their intestines, they all begin to shrink. Another adaptation that they have, they're obviously not stopping and drinking water when they're going through migration, but what they can do is they can break down their own muscle, and then they use the water that's in their muscle to help them with flight and to avoid any sort of heat stress. And when they're at these stopover sites, they're able to actually rebuild their muscle mass. So if you were to catch a bird in the beginning of the day and then a bird at the end of the day, there would be a difference in their muscle mass. Okay, so what birds do we have here in Wild Basin? These are seriously just a handful of birds that we have that are migrating through. We have sweets and thrush. These guys, they will breed all the way up in the boreal forests in Canada, and they come right through central Texas. We've had a lot of these in Wild Basin. Common yellowthroats, we have magnolia warblers, summer tanagers, and black and white warblers as well. Now these two birds, they do breed here, but the majority of their breeding territory is actually way beyond Texas. So when you see an influx of these birds in the spring, don't assume that they're all here breeding. They're not. A lot of them are actually moving on up north. And then, of course, there's the Nashville warbler. You might be wondering, why does she have Nashville warblers everywhere? It's because it's one of my target species, and I love them. Okay, so this is all very fascinating, wonderful, right? But why should we even care about these birds? A lot of these birds aren't even going to be staying here in Texas, right? Well, it's because they're an integral part of our ecosystems that we have. I think this picture kind of says it all. It's not just, if the birds weren't here, the ecosystem would accommodate. No, it would be very different. There would be systems completely collapsing. They're also bellwethers for environmental change. They're sensitive to pollutants and climate change. We already know that some of these birds are shifting their ranges because of climate change. And they're changing their migration patterns. Some birds are coming sooner than others. So, of course, birds bring us joy, right? They make us happy. They make me happy. Sometimes I don't even realize, I'll get in a good mood and I'll realize, it's because of the Buick's wren. He's singing his great song. And also, there was a really monumental paper that came out in 2019 by Rosenberg and et al. And his colleagues, and basically it said that we have lost over 3 billion birds within the last 40 years or 50 years. And 58% are migratory birds, so they're extremely sensitive. Here's a graph, and it has the specific habitat types and the birds that are influenced by these negative trends. You can see grassland birds have been really affected by this loss, and it's because it's really just habitat loss, right? It's because of the agriculture and everything that we're doing. But I'm not just showing you this, there's hope. And the reason why I'm showing you this graph is because when you see the wetlands up there, you see how the trend is different? All right, well that trend, wetlands, we've had a lot of interest from a lot of different communities, from hunters, from conservationists. We've really put in a lot of effort in conserving these wetland habitats, and the birds respond. You know, that's the good part, is that with proper management, these birds are going to respond positively. All right, so there's really innovative research and conservation tools that we can use. There's radar that we can use. There's eBird. I'm going to show you all about these things. There's MODIS tracking system, which I'm really excited about. Metabolite profiling, that's what I do, and I'll tell you more about that later. I'm just going to concentrate on the first four. We also have things like little geolocators. They're little backpacks that you can put on birds, and they have light sensors, and depending on where the bird is, it will document when the sun is rising and when the sun is setting, and you're able to pinpoint exactly where that bird is laterally. You know, like, so it's pretty fascinating stuff. The limitation with that is you need to recapture the bird. So if you put one of these little, you know, geolocators on a bird, you don't recapture it, you're not going to get the data. And then there's still stable isotope stuff, which is really interesting. You can look at stable isotopes in feathers of birds, and it will actually tell you where the bird was born, where it was bred. And you could catch the bird anywhere along its migratory route and discover that, which is really fascinating. Okay, so going back to radar, we saw the birdcast map with all those birds moving, migrating through. Now they just have really super powerful computers, and you know, with NextRad, and it's something called dual polarization. It's really, really interesting, innovative stuff. Birdcast has been able to use this technology for the betterment of birds, and so Birdcast, along with Audubon, and along with many other nonprofits and bird conservation organizations, they have come together, and using this radar, they are able to figure out exactly when the birds are coming through. And because of this, they're able to notify and start this educational program about turn your lights out. You know, a lot of these birds get very disorientated if they see light pollution. They're attracted to it, so they're attracted to the big cities, and then they get caught. And sometimes they'll strike the windows, and it's just not good. It delays them with their migration. So using that radar, we're able to figure out when they're coming through. And now we have Houston, Dallas, Austin, Dripping Springs. They're all cities that are involved with the Lights Out campaign, and they're actually actively using it. So there's another tool that we're using, and it's eBird. And does anybody participate in eBird? Yeah, great, good. It's great, it's wonderful. It's basically you go out, you bird, and there's an app, and you put down all the birds that you've seen, and it helps scientists figure out exactly where these birds are in their ranges. It's really, I think this has probably been one of the most great successes of citizen science that's been out there. This is a yellow warbler. We see them in the spring and the fall here in Central Texas. And this is an abundance map here. This is eBird data. This is just birders. And they're actually, scientists are able to create these maps because of all the observations. So you can actually see where they are in abundance.
Do you have to know what type of bird it is? Can you just post a picture and somebody can tell you?
No, but you have to go with a birder. You meet some birder friends, and they'll help you. But you can even do things like cardinals. Like you see a cardinal, I mean, if you know, it doesn't have to be anything too fancy. Well, using eBird data, Nature Conservancy has been able to create something called a pop-up wetland. So in the Central Valley of California, historically, the shorebirds that have been breeding in the very northern parts of Canada, they don't use as many stopover sites as the songbirds do. They just have like a few that are very, very, very important for them. And the Central Valley has always been extremely important for these birds. But because of agricultural use, there's been a lot of habitat loss. But what Nature Conservancy did is they saw when very specific species were coming through. The radar's wonderful, but it's not species specific. eBird is. So they found when these very specific species were migrating through and knew that they needed habitat. They needed a place to land and to refuel. So Nature Conservancy has begun paying their farmers to flood their rice fields, their fallow farms, ranges, during the spring, exactly when these birds need it. So it's an excellent way. They're almost like renting habitat. It's really fascinating. Another technology is MODIS, the MODIS tracking system. This is something I'm very excited about. Right here you have like an antenna, right? It looks like an old TV antenna. That's the MODIS receiver. And you put these tiny, tiny little nano tags on the back of the birds. They're so tiny that they even have nano tags for monarch butterflies. That's how tiny they are. They weigh hardly anything. And they are basically radio transmitters. And every time they're sending out a very distinct, special signal. And every time they pass one of these antennas, the antenna picks it up and stores it into a computer. And people are able to find very specific places on where these birds are migrating. Because we don't know, like you see them come in the spring, you see them come in the fall, but no one knows exactly where these places are. But all this technology has given, ornithologists and, conservationists really, really specific ideas about where.
What is the width of the range of detection for a MODIS?
It depends on the strength, but it could be as far as how many miles? Like 10 miles?
Wow.
Something like that. Yeah, it's really, really, it's really fascinating. It's really incredible. We actually have one up at West Cave Preserve. Has anyone ever been to West Cave Preserve? It's a great place. Yeah, it's near Hamilton Pool. It's amazing. It's it's a great place, and we actually started putting one up. But let me tell you, okay, I don't know much about this stuff, and there's a lot of troubleshooting. So we're trying to make it work. We're going to make it work, though. I have hope. So there's also, you can use, there's physiology conservation techniques, and that's something that I do. I'm using metabolite profiling to find and to compare habitat, like the value of habitat here in Central Texas. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out what is the best habitat for migratory birds here in Central Texas. It's amazing. There's so much migration studies that's happening in the Northeast, but there's really not a lot here at all. You hear about migration studies just on the coast, but beyond that, we really don't know what birds need. My thinking is that riparian areas are extremely important for these birds. If you're a birder and you go out there, if you go to a river, you're going to find a lot of birds, especially high up in the trees, right? But in the uplands, when you get these great, heritage oaks that are massive, and they have the little catkins that seed out or fruit out in the springtime, there's warblers all around there. So we don't know what's the best habitat. And the reason why it's so important is because we have to try and prioritize and figure out what is good for these birds so that when we're protecting land in the future, we know exactly what they're going to need and what are the habitat characteristics that are important for them. Right? So here we go. We don't know. We don't know about Central Texas at all. Another thing that we have to contend with, when we're thinking about Central Texas and weather and what would be important is climate change. So historically, there's something called the 100th meridian. And historically, everyone thought that, okay, the United States, it's basically divided into two sections, the arid west and the more mesic east. But now that line has shifted, Now we are no longer east of the meridian. Now we are west of it. So we are considered the arid part of the country, no longer the mesic part of the country. So what does that mean? We could look at, riparian areas in the southwest, and we know that they're extremely important for migratory birds. So in the future, they may become even more important. So the Wild Basin is one of my study sites. It's one of my favorite study sites. Actually, the bird that I caught here, I'm taking a little bit of blood to actually, I didn't tell you exactly why I'm taking the blood, have I? Okay. Let's go back to the physiology. Okay. So, taking blood from a bird, this blood was not harmed, I promise. Taking blood from that bird, you can actually analyze and see the amount of triglycerides that are in that bird. So you know how much that bird is eating. If it doesn't have a lot of triglycerides, you know it's not good habitat. If you have a bird and it has an amazing amount of triglycerides, you know it's eating a lot and it's great stopover habitat. So basically what I'm doing is I'm comparing riparian areas, upland areas, and I'm looking at their triglycerides. So I do it because it's really important for also the direction of the way we want to manage these birds. So I have some preliminary results. So it was spring 2022. I went into the lab. I'm collaborating with a researcher up in Rochester. I was in her lab and the triglycerides were low. Like, she was like, I don't know if we did this right. Like, these triglycerides are very low. But that was the spring when we had barely any rain, and it was after all of our crazy ice storms that we were having. So there wasn't a lot for the birds to eat. This year, this spring, even though we've had an interesting summer with heat and drought, the springtime we've actually had a fair amount of rain. And there has been a difference between the amount of triglycerides just by year, which is an interesting effect that I never thought was going to happen. But it was really interesting to see. So that's my research. Okay, so what can you do? Yes?
I was going to ask, what about fall migration? Because we've had a heinous summer.
Yeah.
And so they need to fuel up before they're
Yeah,
south.
I know.
Thought about that.
It kind of worries me because I think a lot of the fall migrants, they really depend on fruit for migration as opposed to springtime where they're eating more insects. And I'm not sure that there's a lot fruiting out there this past fall, but yeah, I don't know. But okay, so what can you do? You can turn your lights off during migration. That would be a good help. Plant natives in your yard. I mean, I can't emphasize this enough, especially bushes. Everyone thinks, oh, okay, birds love like a big tree. They do, but they really, really need bushes too. I promise you that. They need bushes that are going to produce fruits and have insects, and they really enjoy and need a complexity of vegetation. Keep your cats indoors. I am a cat owner. I have 2 cats, but they are indoor cats. Really important. And I know this is a hard one for a lot of people. I don't know why, but it's really hard for a lot of people to keep their cats indoors. It's really important. You think about this, I'm not sure what kind of warbler that is, but it's crossed over, yeah. It's crossed over, the jungles in Central America, and it's gone over South Texas, and it's done all these things, and then all of a sudden it meets a cat, and then the cat walks away. So, I don't know. Just keep your cat inside. So prevent window strikes is another thing. You could put decals. If you have one window in particular, just put decals on that window. You could even put I hang a dream catcher and one of my windows that I've had a bird strike with. You can buy Smithsonian bird-friendly coffee, which is amazing. This picture here, this isn't a wild jungle. This is actually a coffee plantation. It's shade grown, and they certify certain coffee roasters that will just buy from those specific places, and they're really important for birds. And then you can do eBird. You could participate. You can join a birding group, which would be great. Austin has a very rich, great, large birding community, and I love it. I love it. It's like all ages, everyone's involved, little kids, older people, it doesn't even matter. It's out there, and it's great, and it's, yeah, I think we were just talking about this before. It's zen. It's zen for me to go out there and go birding, so I encourage everyone to. But, okay, that's all I have for you all. Let me know if you have any questions. Yes.
So take a yellow or a Nashville warbler that's maybe come through central Texas.
Uh-huh.
So, 2 questions. Is the spring route the same as the fall migration?
No, no.
But the other thing is so you see a bird,
Mm-hmm.
see a Nashville.
Uh-huh.
Is it going to be gone the next day, or is it going to spend a few days in that habitat, hanging up?
It depends. Okay, so for your first question, there's something really interesting that is called loop migration, where the birds really utilize the winds, right? So like in the springtime, there's something called a plains jet, and it really facilitates the birds moving through the center of the United States, so the central flyway. And then it kind of like in the fall, spring, a lot of these species will go over east, and then they kind of like follow for whatever, probably for weather conditions and also availability of prey. They kind of do this like rotation thing. So it's not necessarily, again, it's not every species, but that's a general pattern that you see in migratory songbirds. And then as for birds, springtime, they're usually trying to get going, if a place is providing enough food and it's able to eat as much as it can, it'll try and leave the next day. Also, if a bird lands and there's nothing there to eat, it'll keep migrating, not far, but it'll do some more like local migration where it just tries to find just enough food that it can regain that fat store.
So I was surprised. I thought that most of the warblers are looking for high protein, high fat insects, caterpillars.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying that on the fall migration, they're actually eating fruit?
Not all of them. For some of them, they actually have this plasticity in their diet. So some of the even warblers will start eating fruits in the fall. But yeah, I mean, not all of them. Sorry, I didn't want to give the impression that they're all eating fruit, but yeah. So in the springtime, generally here we have the insects, and then in the fall, there's generally an abundance of fruits. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's just more types of food depending on the season. Yes?
I had a question about, so migrants come through, obviously they want to use as much energy as possible for like migrate, not really much else.
Uh-huh.
Why do migrants sing? Because I was at Wild Basin this spring.
Yeah.
I come up there, there's a Nashville warbler singing. Why is
Yeah.
it singing if singing is like really energetic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's hormonal.
Okay.
I think they're just getting going. Yeah. I think for some of these birds, you can even see, it's called a cloacal protuberance in the males, and you can even see that in stopovers. So their bodies are preparing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
I know you probably don't have an answer, but I'm curious if you have an opinion. The one on that graph you showed of bird declines,
Mm-hmm.
you showed that wetland
Mm-hmm.
birds were increasing. Do you have any thoughts on whether the Supreme Court ruling may affect that? The Supreme Court ruling affecting what is considered a wetland, which greatly, radically
Yeah,
cut back what is considered a wetland.
yeah,
Protect it as a wetland.
yeah, yeah. I would think so. Yeah, I would absolutely think so. Yeah, that's one of the, I don't know, it's interesting because wetlands were always like hands off, you know? And now it's no longer hands off, so we really don't know what the implications are going to be for that. You know, I don't know. It's a really good question, though. Yes.
Do you think there's any tie between, I know you said loss of habitat's the main cause of the decline. But what about the use of pesticides, like even homeowners using so many
Yeah.
pesticides?
Absolutely.
Because I know the insect population's really declined.
Yeah, yeah. Neonicotinoids is a pesticide that has been linked directly to bird declines. Yes, that's also one of them. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hoping, I think there's been a push to try and limit the neonics, they call them neonics, but I think there's been a push to try and do something about getting them outlawed. I know that they're not allowed in Europe, but yeah, hopefully we could do something about that. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges for these birds, you know, but yes.
Well, that actually is interesting as a follow-up to that. Is Europe seeing the same kinds of declines as we are?
Yes, so that, they are, I believe that they are. I don't know if there's been a big publication like the one that's been printed, but I know that Europe has had really, really harsh declines in invertebrates, especially in like Germany. I think there was a study in Germany where, yeah, like the insect populations have just really declined as well. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a worldwide trend
Okay.
that's happening.
I was curious.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's hope. You know, I wouldn't be up here if there wasn't any hope. You know, I truly believe that we can protect what as much as we can. You know, there's some species that it's going to be really hard, and we might not be able to save everything. But I really believe that with enough concerned people, and hopefully with this new attitude we're taking toward being more active with climate change, hopefully this will help the birds. Yeah. Yes.
Have you seen any trends in your blood sampling, like species-wise?
I haven't done that specific statistics yet for species-wide. So I'm reluctant to say anything right now. But I did see, for example, that thrushes did better, you know, this past year than the last. And the warblers did. The warblers did too. But not the orioles or the buntings. I noticed that they didn't really seem to change. But that's not, I don't want to put that out there. I didn't do my statistics yet. But that's kind of just a general trend that I noticed. Yeah.
So when you're doing your riparian test site versus your upland, do you have like multiple riparian areas, or is it all on one spot of the Colorado River, or how do you kind of decide?
I have 6 sites.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have 3 riparian and 3 upland. Yeah, comparative ones. I have, an urban riparian, which is Wild Basin. And then I have my Nootsy site that's on the BCP, also out here. And then I have it sort of like increasing westward. Yeah. So yeah, I have 6 sites. So it's the trends have been pretty consistent, you know, throughout. But yeah, that's it. Okay, is that it? Oh, yes.
I noticed for what you can do, you don't have feeding them. Is that an
Oh.
option?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
What
yes.
would that look like?
To feed the birds?
Yeah.
I have a suet feeder that I put out because it has a lot of protein, you know, and fats. So I just put out a suet feeder. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, honestly, if you want birds in your property, water. If you have a little water feature, that is probably, you know, that's really going to bring them in, especially during the drought. It's really important. Yeah. I'm not opposed to feeding. I'm not that diehard. Like yeah. Yeah. So good. Well, thank you everyone for coming.